you know. And I'm afraid to say, even after all these years, I find myself totally flawed trying to produce a one-liner to tell the press what the show is about. In a way, it's easier to talk about it for an hour than to produce one sentence. And I think the way in which the exhibition has gone down with you, the visitors, has proved that point also, because we have found that people who come to see the exhibition spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours sitting and looking at what there is to see, which is a fantastic accolade in these days of 5-second takes and advertisements that work subliminally and so on. The fact that people are prepared to work at getting the tremendous rewards that are possible from this kind of sculpture. There aren't so many artists working at this moment who are prepared to put the amount of effort into any individual work of art and expect the public to return the compliment, as it were, by working hard to get something out of it. But I think you would agree with me that Richard Deacon has managed that in a fantastically successful way. So, if there's no more people coming in, there are some couple of seats up front here. I shall ask Richard to go straight on with his talk.
Okay. If I'd realised Lewis only wanted a one-liner, I wouldn't have gone to all this trouble. What I'm going to do is, there's a seat here and there's a couple further back if you don't want to be too close to me. What I'm going to do is break this talk into 2 bits, really. There's quickly a group of slides which I took walking around the exhibition, just to speak in fairly general terms about how the exhibition's organised, where the works come from, what they were trying to do, what I was trying to do by putting them together, some of which is fairly obvious and some of which may tell you something. And then there's a gap, and then I'm going to talk quite extensively about one work in the show, the big wooden sculpture La Coon, to try and indicate where the ideas came from, how what led up to it, and what the result is, what my intentions were, those kinds of things. So rather than trying to do that for all the works, in which case you'd be here forever, I thought I'd try and do it for just one, because it does. In doing so, I do bring in some things, bring in some ideas which are perhaps general to the, or spread out perhaps into the other works in the show. I should apologise in advance for the quality of the first few slides. They're my slides. I took them walking around the exhibition, and I seem to have misset my camera, so they're slightly overexposed. But really, they're only there. I thought it was okay because they're only really there just to remind you, as the song says. Right. Actually, it might help if the house lights went right down, if that's possible. Can they go right down? Okay, the exhibition opens with a group of 7 large drawings on polycarbonate, which were originally, which are both the introduction and also the earliest works in the exhibition. They were originally installed in an exhibition in Germany at a gallery in Krefeld, which is housed in a house by the architect Mies van der Rohe. And these were originally installed over the windows of the house. And the idea had been to push the works that I was making for the exhibition so that they were situated in between the architecture of the house and the garden, so that there was an attempt to try and push the works to vacate the space of the museum, but without vacating the house. And in the context of this show here, it serves as an inside space. It serves as also as an outside-inside space. You enter immediately, and you're immediately within an empty space, and as if you were within a piece of sculpture. The orientation of the windows, shall we call them? The orientation of the windows is as it was in the that when you're within this square, you're looking out of them in the same way as you would have looked out of the house in Hauslange, and you see the works beyond, either vaguely through the polycarbonate or in fragmentary form through the gaps in between the screens. The images on the screens are are derived fairly loosely from a group of rather arbitrarily selected found objects, and the intention behind I was drawing them in the way that they were drawn was to, and clearly some are drawn positive on negative, others are drawn negative on positive. Was to find a way of drawing which fill the volume without drawing an edge, so that the drawing itself is a shape, but the shape doesn't. But the contour, the edge of the shape, is defined by the point where the marks stop, rather than defined by a unitary line. So as you, I think this next to. Perhaps that shows more clearly. So the ones on these 3 are white on black, and the others are black on white, which is what I meant by negative or positive. As you walk in and then you go to the right, then on that side of the exhibition is a group of larger sculptures. By larger, they're sort of at or near body size, larger than body size. It's a kind of size which interrupts you, that gets in your way. and these are all, and not all, no, they're made in a variety of ways with a variety of materials. The materials are fairly heavily manipulated, and the sculpture and the installation of the sculpture itself is almost crowded, so that as you walk around, you have to negotiate these objects. You have to walk around them, and in general, when you see one object, you see another beyond it, or you see, as in the slides, you see several in a point of view. They're difficult to isolate. They're continually being seen in relationship to each other, and and you're aware of your presence in this section of the space as being on a similar scale, or somehow matching up to the sculpture that you're looking at. On the other side of the screens is a larger number, 14 I think, of very much smaller works. And in contradiction to the experience on the other side, these works, although when you first see them, you survey them as if you're looking across a field of objects, you're very much above them. These objects are all individually isolatable. They're sufficiently distant from one another to be seen within their own field of the floor, and they're also very much more. They're also, and even more than the previous, even more than the larger ones, materially diverse. The materials are handled in very different ways. The surfaces are very rich. There's quite a lot. There's a reasonable amount of colour. Some of them are quite highly coloured objects, or the surfaces are quite highly reflective. They all behave very particularly in relationship to light. Light's quite a kind of strong aspect of the way these objects are, and these are. Whereas on the other side, the objects were all the sculptures are individually titled, and all of these bar two cohere under one title, so that the sculptures on the other side, although one sees them as a crowd, and as I say, you tend to see them in relationship to one another, they're individuated by their titles, whereas these are individuated by their separateness, and they're different ways of they're different manipulations, they're different ways in which they're formed, they're difference in colour, and by their separateness on the floor, and in your sense of yourself in these three rooms, the way in which you are looking at things has changed from being within the first chamber, shall we call it, within the first room, to being among in the other on the other side, and to being above on this side. So you're the way in which you as the spectator negotiates these objects is transformed. going through from the galleries on the dock side to the galleries on the riverside, there is a little room which I chose to hang this group of drawings. There are a group of drawings produced 95, 96, somewhat in the middle of the period of which the works in the exhibition are shown. They're fairly intense and fairly intimate drawings, and they act as a kind of reprise for the very big drawings of the a kind of reversal of the very first chamber, where you have an empty space which the drawings are, in which the very large drawings are suspended in. This is very much a kind of closed room, and the drawings, many more of them, of many different kinds, are hung in a kind of classical way, so that they're so these, if I suppose the analogy would be to say that if in the first room it was as if you were inside the sculpture, in this room it's much more as if you were inside my head, or inside a kind of catalogue, really, rather than inside my head. And it's not quite like this inside my head. It's a little less organised. So it's more. So it's perhaps more like you're inside a list, or inside a catalogue, inside a dictionary of some sort. I tend to think of these drawings as a kind of list, and they anticipate some of the. They anticipate shapes. They rehearse shapes that have occurred before. They echo things that none of them are drawings for things, but within the drawings you can find references or echoes to things which occur in various sculptures, so that the transparent, the big. There we go. I can't walk very far with this, so I'll just put it down. So the big transparent work, for example, in the far corner, just by the dock, you can see that perhaps there, for example, or some of the curvatures within Raccoon, you can see here. Or equally, this kind of knotting in these. So, I'll just re-plug myself in. Okay. So from that small room, you go to another small room, but in this case, the small room is physically occupied. So by this very large wooden work, and this is the view. This is sort of the first view you get of it, fragmented, and across the doorway, the light coming from the window, and also coming through these gaps in the wooden structure, and through the holes in this woven metal piece here. So the first view of the work is of a fragment, and the fragment only only becomes a whole when you enter the room. Again, this is unlike the other experiences that one has had of the sculptures where you've seen where you've been able to see them as whole things from your first view of them. So this is the view, on one side is the view looking back into the room once you've gone round it, and the other is looking out of the room again, where you see the fragments of two other of the large wooden sculptures, which are the dominant works in the galleries on this side, all of which are you initially encounter as fragments. And you might well have seen this from before you go in, through the entrance. You might well have seen this from the entrance. So perhaps you know what you're going to see to some extent. And then maybe just get any better. And then, the installation then becomes much more spacious. There are three works in the central gallery on the river side. The small, very self-contained aluminium object, the large wooden sculpture La Coon, and this open work which is called Table, although in fact it's as if it were an inverted cushion or an inverted label. So within this space, there's suddenly a kind of distance and almost like a kind of classic disposition of sculptures. And then finally, again in the final room, pushed in and almost too big for the space, is the third of the big wooden works. What could make me feel this way? Slightly muscular, slightly threatening, slightly energetic within the space. So I suppose if I on which again you've seen as a fragment to begin with. And the things I've left to last are the small group of 4 drawings mounted on photographs, which are on the wall of the main gallery on the dock side. Again, this is an attempt to try and reintroduce some of the qualities or some things which are raised within the chamber in the first chamber you enter. In that case, the works were those big screens were originally installed in windows, looking out over a garden, and in these the drawings are installed in that there is a hole cut in the photographs which accommodates the drawings. These drawings are installed in a space. They're installed in the sky, which means that they have no scale. The perspective of the sky, or the perspective of the photograph, means that the image is, whatever the drawing is is scaleless. It's either enormous or small, but it is without scale, although within a place. So that was that's just a quick tour through the exhibition. Now, as I say, I'd like to talk about La Cune. Of which there are 2 photographs here of it in the studio while it was being made. The genesis for this, for the genesis for this talk was, and in a sense, the genesis for the work. The genesis for the talk is a recollection of the incident which prompted the making of this work. The incident in question is one that's been that I've mentioned a couple of times. Is standing in Sainsbury's about to buy some cheese and wondering what it would be like if the holes in a piece of cheese was so big that there was no cheese, there was very little cheese left, and that you could think of cheese, think of Swiss cheese as being material around a hole, and then thinking that that was the solution to a problem that I'd had, to think of the material around a hole, to think of a hole being as being something which could occupy a volume. So sometime later, I began to try and work out why it was that seemed like a solution, or that seemed like an idea that I could follow. And to do so, I have to go back a bit and start talking about things that had been occupying or been interesting me towards the end of the 80s. I became interested in a process of making work whereby you could make work by setting up certain kinds of rules, but without knowing exactly what it was you were making, and the thing that I was interested to make was something that was slightly uncontrolled, that had a form that I was that I hadn't imagined, but at the same time that this form making was not an arbitrary act. I was interested in in trying to make something which had both precision, control, and thought and time spent on it, but at the same time was slightly was unpredicted. That it's that had a degree of the unknown attached to it. And one of the methods I was exploring at the time was a kind of architectural process of drawing in opposed directions, as it were, plan and elevation, and making sure that the shapes drawn linked together, but without actually knowing what it was that the shapes made when they were joined up. I'm going to take this off again just to try and explain it a bit more fully. So this work is the same in both photographs. So this work is made by drawing a set of shapes to scale, and again these as well, and by mapping, for example, the or knowing the distance between these two and the points which are connecting together. So these forms connect those points. So the first drawing is a kind of sectional process. So you just section an imagined form and section another imagined form and suggest that they're going to link along these planes. These are linking planes separated by this. But all this line has to do is it just has to join that point to that point. It doesn't have to follow any other. So it has an infinite number of possibilities. So there are some intuitive decisions about the kinds of shape that I want to use to link those. So the work is made by kind of following those rules. It's following drawing rules, but at no point is what's contained within the contour ever drawn. So there's no the work has no shape in terms of a volumetric. It's got an indescribable shape. It's a means to sort of try to make something which is slightly indescribable. And for that reason, it's also the channels here are inside out. So that the interior of this work has a continuous surface, and the presumption is that continuous surface defines a particular shape, or defines a particular volume, defines a particular form, but that the form itself is always undefined, is always not drawn, is always something that is unknown. So I've been interested in making work which followed those kinds of contradictory procedures, or those kinds of a way of using making to make something I didn't know about. This is another example. This is made in beaten copper, using a similar procedure where a set of horizontal and vertical sections is established in drawing, and then it was all that the copper had to do, and in this case there's a considerable technical problem to get to transform the sheet material into something which can follow a three-dimensional form. So what the copper had to do was to conform to those horizontal and vertical sections, but the rest of the form making is, as it were, undetermined. In 91, in 91, in the same exhibition as the drawings on the screen were, I was sort of continuing this kind of procedure and wanting to make something using using in part pre-made components, and the pre-made components that I was looking at were cast pipe elbows, which had either a tight or a broad radius, and seeing what could be done to connect those together. So, in this work, for example, this is a pre-made bend. I kind of knew that, and this piece is industrially bent to fit, and this is a pre-made bend. So, this is a industrial bend. So I sort of knew that I couldn't bend a thick tube into a tight bend, but it might be possible to get it bent into a large radius curve, and so these forms were made by building up a shape by combining a big radius with a tight radius bend, which gives a variety of sequences of kinds of curve, and then those curves, again, it's not unlike the kinds of sectioning or drawing processes that I'd used before. Those kinds of curves were sort of kebabbed together using just a single line of pushed along them, so that they link together. And what you get, what I got, is this kind of rather complex contour. Again, it was a way of creating something that was largely undetermined by a very deterministic process, by procedure of following through. So that the shape that I was interested in getting at was this kind of combination, this piling up of the different shapes and the kinds of form or that might be contained or might be indeterminate but described by the construction. I think it's also important to mention, because it becomes important later, and that the tubes themselves remained hollow, and that where this pipe goes through, it's cut into this tube underneath. So there is notionally there is a complete volume inside, that this isn't blanked off somehow. This straight pipe connects to each of the curves, and that seems to become an important feature as the ideas kind of develop. So immediately after doing that, I was invited to make a commission for a commission work for a small town in southern Germany, a town called Weiblingen. And if I go back just a bit, there was something that I was very interested in the kind of stacking up of shape in these, in this work, in the possibilities that this rather simple sort of kebabbing device seemed to do to enable you to put things together. So it was something that I was thinking about very much when I went to Weiblingen. The work that resulted is on your left there. Again, I have to take this off just for a second. When I speak, can you hear me at the back without the microphone? Okay. And this is a very shiny slide. I'm sorry about this, but this is from the City Museum, the little museum. It's quite a small town, but it had a museum, a small local museum, which interested me very much because of its and the way it interested me was because of its use of that traditional sort of archaeological device, the section or the dig, the way in which that was incorporated within the museum. And this is just an example. This is the house, which is the museum, is an old tannery, medieval tannery. And when the house was occupied for the museum, this is the basement. The basement seemed to be very low, actually at this height here. It's barely crawl space. But once they'd started to refurbish the room, they realised that actually the basement was really quite deep. But it's just because over the last 500 years people have been chucking their rubbish into the basement that it accumulated this sort of midden of broken pots, decayed cabbage, and all the rest of it in the basement. And they started to dig it out. They left a single column of the basement. This is the level of the basement floor, and cut it away so you could actually see what it's kind of visual evidence of this digging process. And there are various other places within the museum which use a similar principle, where a wall is cut into, or a section is made as a means of demonstrating. So the museum itself not only becomes the site of an archaeological investigation, but also shows the process by which that excavation is constructed. And it becomes very poignant in a room on the first floor. Weiblingen is a town where nothing happened, except in 1634 it got burnt down in the 30 Years' War. And so this is and when it was burnt down, it was rebuilt very quickly. So it's a medieval town, all of which built within 30 years within 30 years after 1634, the date which the town was built. But curiously, when it was rebuilt, it wasn't rebuilt on the same street plan. It was built on a kind of medieval plan, but sometimes houses were built on gardens, and which were previously gardens, and sometimes the reverse. So that there are the town had at least two, if not more, kind of plans kind of overlaid on it. So this is on your right is the town plan as it exists today, and the what you have on the left here is a column of earth from a garden, and this is 1634 here, this line of black, and it's a very powerful demonstration of both the accumulation of history and the impact of of event. And I also found the idea that the layering, one on top of each other, of interest, had married with the kinds of somehow it seemed to enrich the notion of this layering up of shape, which I've been trying to do, so that the accumulation in depth, the kind of rational process of excavation, reveals layer by layer something which builds up into something very complex. It seemed to be a kind of echo the something that I was intrigued by, this kind of relationship between determinacy and rigor, or determinacy and procedure. So this was the work that resulted, called "This Is Not a Story." So having used this procedure for making work, a kind of layering up along these long elements, I became kind of interested in whether in weaving as an analogue for that procedure, or whether these when you talk about events, one often discusses them, or the time. The idea of weaving seems to be seems to be a part of it. So that I think, in a way, that idea of history or narrative did contribute to my thinking that a similar procedure could be utilized, but rather than the shapes, the linear elements being the connections between the things that are kind of warp and a weft, like a kind of basket making, could be a possible procedure, could be a way of doing things. So that this work from '93 continues to look at and elaborate a kind of form-making process. Now, I don't particularly know why I decided to make this to jump from making a work in wood, making a work in steel, to making a work in wood, other than that that's something that I've done a lot, is to tend to change materials when as I move on, so that although over a long Now, I don't particularly know why I decided to make this to jump from making a work in wood, making a work in steel to making a work in wood, other than that's something that I've done a lot, is to tend to change materials when as I move on, so that although over a long period of time I may use similar materials or similar procedures, in moving on from one work to the next, and actually this work came very soon after the finish of the work in Weiblingen, I do have a habit of changing materials. In a way, it's a way of finishing one thing and starting a new thing, but it's also to do with trying to, and I suppose it also has to do with trying to keep the making process and my interest in materials and my interest in the way that materials relate to the world and the kinds of ideas that I'm having, trying to keep them somehow engaged with the world. But in any case, it occurred to me that I'd like to make a basket, and that basket making did have some connection to the kinds of things that I'd done in the work in Weiblingen, and that there was I'd also just begun to bend things rather than to laminate as a process. Begun to bend things. And I was interested in how much that if you keep on in a kind of repetition, just bending and bending and bending and bending, what kind of form you'd make. And I suppose the other thing is that, and I think there is an anthropological term for it, but I forget what it is. But for example, when a technology changes, you often find aspects of one technology carried over into the new technology. I suppose the easiest thing to suggest to indicate as a means of as an example of what I mean is to talk about the welts on plastic shoes, so that there's no need for plastic shoes to have welts on, but because they're shoes and shoes have been constructed in leather, then they tend to put welts on plastic shoes. So that, in a way, choosing to make a basket out of tubes, I think is a kind of carryover or a retention of the thing which I mentioned as being important, that I thought was important in the first one, but again is significant in this one, in that there is also a kind of, I mean, these tubes are hollow, and this tube is let into that tube, so that there is notionally a kind of continuous, a continuous hollow space within the work. So there is a continuity within it, that all of the work is connected together, both physically, but also that there is a whole within it. So that I think the reason for deciding to make tubes is in part a carryover from that, or that there is something that I'm interested in which is undetermined, so I'm keeping it there for for future reference, or because it may come in, because I may be able to work out why it is that I'm interested in a tube rather than a solid. So, I mean, as this work shows, it from one point of view, it's something like a hedge, a kind of an immense jumble of many discrete elements. And again, it also has some slight bearing on the kinds of drawings that I was doing, that I showed when I started this talk. The drawings on the plastic sheets, where a form is made up by the same mark being repeated over an area, rather than a form being drawn by an outline. And then from the side, the organisation becomes very evident, and it becomes very quickly clear that, in fact, it's not compacted. It is organised. But I was, and so it has this disjunction between two sides, a kind of an order, a compression that gives you this sort of very complex outline, and then a breakdown into parts. The next stage in the procedure, or the next stage in the narrative story, is really something that never came to fruition. Shortly after, so this was made, it's finished at the end of '93, I think, shown in '93 in Hanover. And in '94, I keep on treading on this mic. And in '94, I was invited to go to Atlanta to make a commission for the Olympic Games that was scheduled for '96. And the site that I was shown was this site here, which actually Tony Cragg finally did the project for. Partly for reasons that I think will become evident when I talk about it. Because although I knew what I wanted to make, I didn't know how to make it. And it's not really recommended as a way to gain commissions, is to say, well, I know what I want to make, but I don't quite know how to make it. What the site is, what I suppose interested me about this, what I found interesting in the site, was that it was quite close to the Martin Luther King Center for the Study of Nonviolence, and also to the Jimmy Carter Memorial Center. And both of these institutions, quite unusual for American political institutions, have a degree of radical politics attached to them. And also they have a notion, they have implicit within their organization an idea that things could be better, things could be other than they are, a certain kind of utopianism attached to it. A part of my reflection was, I suppose, following on from that experience in Weiblingen with trying to work out with making something which paralleled that sense of narrative that sense of construction through history. I wanted somehow to try and be thinking about, if not incorporate, the notion of the notion that things could be other than they are within the work. I wanted to incorporate a sense of hopeful indeterminacy to into the work. It wasn't. I didn't want to make a monument to a heroic future, but somehow I felt that indeterminacy and possibility weren't necessarily contradictory elements, and that the sculpture that I proposed was organized round a sense of indeterminacy. It took its cue from an image not unlike the image on your right there, that sense in which this sculpture in particular had this enormously complex depth to it, that it was both full of material and full and empty, that it was both full and empty at the same time. I spent a long time trying to work out a way of three-dimensional weaving, trying to work out whether it was possible for to have a way in which things could be connected together, not just in sections, as a lot of the previous work had been, but kind of universally connected together. So this is the final proposal on your left, and this is the original. This is the first of the group of drawings that I made on your right. And actually, looking at them today, I realised that what sort of happened was that the original drawings had a sort of an indeterminate structure as a base and a rather determined form on top of it. And the way that the procedure went was to reverse the two. Although, like I say, I still never got really very close to knowing how to make it. The first drawings. This is my finger here. The first drawings were carried on from that sense of weaving and construction, and, shapes woven together that existed, that I used in what could make me feel this way. And then fairly quickly progressed to a kind of drawing like this, which sort of implied a kind of depth, but without really sorting out how it was that any one shape was connected into another shape. And there are some drawings which tried to think, well, maybe things could be connected up like this, or there could be sort of pipes with universal connections, or clusters around us, organized around us, one central bar, piles of stuff. I took some photographs. I mean, I've been taking a lot of photographs of kind of clouds, and but I also tried a sort of chainmail weaving photographs of strings and things. But trying to work out how the principle that would enable me to produce a chaotic structure from an indeterminate structure from determinate elements such that it could be described, because it seemed to be important that I grasp it sufficiently to be able to describe it. The drawings were kind of going in two directions, so that on the one hand there was the drawing of a slightly lumpy structure, like a solid cloud, like this one, or a kind of a hedge, like this one. The drawing seemed to point in two directions, and the directions have no, I think I got this right, because now I start using individual things. And the two directions have both been between this drawing and this work. And the way in which this work was made, it was to make an enormous sheet and fold it up and join it together so that it's together with another part from a cardboard box. And what it gives you is that what it gave me was a sheet which was bendable in several directions at once without losing without becoming over rigid. Normally, I mean, as you probably know, normally when you bend a sheet material, it bends in one direction but becomes rigid in the other direction, so that you can only ever get a two-dimensional bend, only ever really get a two-dimensional bend out of a sheet material. Whereas this was a way to try and get a universal skin, kind of something that would that could fulfill any form. And there is a sense in which the form making, there is a connection between that, again, that procedure of of making the sheet, a fairly mechanical, fairly rational, fairly methodical procedure, and the kind of form making that results from it. This similarly could be applied. Similarly, the method of producing from plastic sheet, which has some capacity for three-dimensional. It has some stretch once heated and bent. So these plastic works do something similar, but they, as to this work, but they have the added benefit of being it being clear that the inside the inside shape is hollow, and also the way in which the construction lines from are the various parts, the weld lines from the various parts are seeable through the transparent surface, adds to the complexity of the form that you see. And then, is that in focus? I think, yeah. So then, I mean, if you look at if we go in and look at the surface close to, we're starting to get a kind of surface which has some connection to this, which I think is a drawing for the one of the drawings for the final shape. So there is so then that brings me back cleverly. Brings me back cleverly to the other direction, which the the other direction which the drawings were indicating, this sort of kind of bush or kind of hedge, which does, which also in kind of drawing terms has distinct connections to these drawings which have been done before as installations in the windows of the house. And sorry. I can't really get that focus. Yeah. And the work, this is just one slide, which may seem slightly out of thing, but there is another group of works which use this kind of reflective surface. So the reflective surface, it's a piece of steel which is bent made like a mattress. You know, it's pillowed. So this, as you walk around it, the surface has this continually changing sets of bright lines, and so it has this. It has a depth, and it has a continually changing construction, although bounded within a frame. So it's like an undrawn. It's as I described, the contour is drawn. The contour is established by what happens within it, by being filled in, rather than the contour being a line. So, okay. So it was at this point that it was around this point that I was standing in Sainsbury's, and I thought that it would be interesting if the holes in a piece of cheese occupied most of the cheese. And then it occurred to me that a potential solution to this problem of three-dimensional weaving was not, as I had been doing, to try and weave parts together, but what I was really trying to do, or one solution, was to make a whole that was packed so tight together it filled a space, and that so I began to make began to find a way to make a model. I began to find a way to work out how to make the kind of thing that I was thinking about by making a model of a line, but the line represented a tube and not a solid that could be packed, that was packed together. I wasn't interested in knotting so much as kind of packing. What I was kind of trying to do was to, and what I think is one of the interesting things about this work is that when you see it, at some point you realize that there is a hole all the way through it, that the hole occupies the same space as the structure, as the wood, and that space and material are both present. It kind of weaves the two together. Material you're aware of it as a material object, but you're also aware of it as this sort of as this whole. Your mind very quickly, as you stand in front of it, realizes that this is there is a clear space through this thing, so that you have both. So both ideas are very present in your head. The idea that there is this clear volume, but at the same time what you're seeing is something which is immensely tangled, or quite tangled, quite clustered together. So it has a kind of solidity to it, and it's that sort of presence of solidity and emptiness, which I think gives the work its strength, or its kind of potency. So that's the story so far. That's it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the process of arriving at the shape, like in the earlier ones, and it was like when you had them kebab together, you were saying you didn't want to consciously go for a shape, which is the way it was, what shape was made in terms.
Yeah.